Now, one of the newly launched political parties that will be vying for power in this year's elections, Mzansi, will be launching its manifesto in Tshwane tomorrow. The organization has positioned itself as mainly focusing on civic education and participation and aims to achieve 7.5% of the national vote, which translates to 30 seats in the National Assembly. Ziyanda Ngcobo joins us in studio for a discussion on this. Ziyanda, very good afternoon to you. Such high expectations. I mean, aiming to get 30 seats in Parliament, that's quite significant. How much work will it take to get there?
So you'll know that Mzansi, in fact, it's 9 months to the day that it launched as a political party. But before that, it was existing just as a movement, just going about trying to establish networks across the country, which is, of course, what you need during an election, and especially if you're trying to tap into the sentiments of the disillusionment against the ANC and unseating the African National Congress. In fact, today I spoke to Vuyiswa who's the national chairperson, and she says in the last 9 months they've actually managed to establish permanent structures in all 9 provinces. Let's listen to what she had to say.
So we've been to all 9 provinces and actually been able to establish permanent leadership structures and municipal level community organizers in various municipalities all over South Africa. And that is what has powered the numbers that you are speaking about. So when we talk about 20,000 supporters a week, that is a function of the thousands of volunteers and organizers that we currently have who wake up and do the work of Mzansi every single day.
Yeah, she talks about powering numbers, what led to that and how the base was formed. And we've seen and we've heard that the stakes are high with the upcoming elections. The ANC declining, they're saying that it could be declining, and that in itself will open doors for smaller parties and coalition politics, and the impact of those smaller parties working in collaboration in a government of national unity. How much of that impact will now lead to Mzansi perhaps thinking of joining other smaller parties, so that smaller parties regrouping to form a bigger footprint would be a more strategic approach? What are they saying when it comes to matters like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation that's been happening. And, on one side, you've seen the Moonshot Pact that has predominantly been led by the Democratic Alliance, which has basically brought together, the more well-known or established political parties like, the UDM, the Freedom Front Plus, Action SA, etc., and they've been working together in municipalities. Then you have on the other side these smaller political parties who, for all intents and purposes, have to contend with not having a track record, having to contend with establishing then that election machinery across the country, who also have to contend with really dipping into the same pool of funding. And so there have been lots of questions about why you see all these parties, whether it's Bosa, whether it's Roger Jardine's Change Starts Now, Mzansi, why they could not all come together and form one thing, or are we going to see at a later stage them coalescing and forming one thing after the election? Yeah. And for Mzansi's part, they've always said that their main focus is on civic education and participation, and they run a lot of campaigns, especially on social media, about what it means to vote, what the role of a ward council is, like literally that kind of, civic education. And I think for them, they've also tapped into established networks such as civil society, and really going about community participation, speaking to people what their issues are. And it's been interesting to note, after speaking to someone like Vuyiswa, where we would think perhaps that load shedding is a critical issue, but they're saying that by and large the issue of hunger is something that continues to crop up. And so tomorrow's manifesto launch will be a culmination of all the discussions that they've had in particular communities. I want you to hear what she said on that aspect.
In terms of our reach, we, following the People's Convention, which took place in September, we really doubled down on creating awareness for Mzansi as a brand and as a credible political alternative for South Africans. And I'm sure if you have been in any major metropolis, not even a major one, even if you've been to numerous rural areas from the Eastern Cape to Giyani to rural Mpumalanga, you would have seen a Rise Mzansi poster or board on a street corner near you. And this is absolutely part of our national visibility campaign. We've also hosted 2 very successful national days of visibility, which have also been countrywide campaigns. And again, just interacting with voters.
Yeah, she speaks a great deal about the distinguishing factor, which is quite important, especially now considering what voters will be looking for, and the younger voter as well, going out there to make their mark, perhaps for the first time, or perhaps for the first time having qualified over many years, but not considering voting because they're thinking, what difference will my vote make?
And that's an important point that you raised, the issue of the new voters. And I think that's what a lot of these newly established political parties are targeting. They're targeting that 18-year-old that's voting for the first time. So when you talk about the tools for campaigning that you use, that becomes critical when you talk about social media, reels on various, social media platforms, etc. But Rise Mzansi has also said that they want to go back to basics. They want to do door-to-door, going literally to everyone's home and speaking about them. However, with all these smaller political parties, there's also been a conversation about having too many options and confusing the voter to the extent that they'll just revert to what they know or what they know their family to vote for. If you speak to many people, they'll tell you that the parties that they voted for previously, it's something that's almost somewhat a family tradition or a culture in a way, because you grew up with your parents speaking about a particular political party, which is why then the aspect of the youth, and there's been a big drive from these all political parties to get young people to register to vote so that you at least have an opportunity to mold their minds in terms of what this South Africa after 30 years of democracy should look like going forward.
What they know is important, but what about who they know?
Yes.
Because there's the ACT, Ace Magashule. I would imagine it's a tried and tested method that he'll also be going door to door. The MK party, former President Jacob Zuma, essentially who they know at that point. How do you see the mix with the smaller parties and the faces that are familiar?
And it's an important question that you ask, because a lot of these smaller political parties have been deliberate in saying they don't want to go fetch a former ANC heavyweight to join them so that they have some semblance of credibility. They're saying they want to move away from that. But you remember, politics is also a lot about people's sentiment and what they feel.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because, since the establishment of Umkhonto we Sizwe Party by former President Jacob Zuma, many people have asked, like, what's so attractive about that organization? And you hear a lot of people saying things like, during former President Jacob Zuma's time, there was this or there was that. And that speaks to the issue of a track record to a certain extent, because, we can debate on the type of track record that he has or had, but that's by and large the sentiment that has been drawing people towards, the MK party, which might draw someone to Ace Magashule's ACT in terms of his tenure as the Free State Premier. So that might be something that could be a positive or a negative factor, depending on who you speak to and how you speak to them about what should happen in this election. So certainly, for the citizenry of the country, it's everything is up for grabs. And when you look at, these smaller parties, I think they're targeting everywhere, but some of them have more specific approaches, like looking in particular at provinces such as Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah, absolutely. The who's in the house will be important as we get into the election season. Ziyanda Ngcobo, they're giving us a roundup of some of the expectations in the Rise Mzansi party. Now,